Hello, everybody. Welcome along to another episode of the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, and as ever, I wish you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's Event Industry News podcast from. A warm welcome to everybody today, and a warm welcome to our guest, a first-timer to the Event Industry News podcast, but first-timers are always welcome. They've always got something interesting to say. Our guest today is Mr. Denzil Rankine. Denzil is the Executive Chairman at AMR International, a firm providing strategy consulting services globally from London, New York, Paris, and New Delhi, specializing in technology, information, media, and events. And it's a very warm welcome to Mr. Denzil Rankine this morning. Denzil, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here.
And yes, I hope you don't mind me pointing out, but our guest today, Denzil, fell foul of the dreaded virus a week or so ago when we were originally going to record. So it's great to see you looking, relatively fit and healthy, all things considered, Denzil. Hope that you're back on your feet and feeling a little bit better than last week.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry we had to postpone, but I think a lot of people are getting COVID as a rite of passage. And I was just one of those people. But that's part of the journey we're all going through, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah, and yes, great to see you back on your feet, and a very warm welcome today. And what we're going to be talking about today is first of all a little bit about AMR International, to find out what those guys do, but then more specifically, them introducing something that they're calling Exhibitions 3.0. More of that in a few minutes' time. But Denzil, first of all, for any of our podcast listeners who have not come across AMR International and what the company does, you founded it in 1991. Tell us why it was founded and what services it provides.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to do so. And that's some time back, isn't it? So back then, I founded the business because I had this fundamental belief that if someone was going to make an investment, get into something new or buy a company, you needed to speak to customers and understand the market. And no one knew what commercial due diligence was at the time. So it was like an evangelical journey that I really believed in, to say, you need to speak to customers, understand markets and so on before you write a check and get into anything new. And it got going, and that's now really a mainstream service. But that's where we started. And the first client we worked with was called Reed International. So that's now become CMLX. And Reed Exhibitions, of course, is part of that. And so that really positioned us very strongly around B2B information, marketing services, data information, and so on, which is part of what some people call TMT. So if you wind the clock on, we're still involved in that, and we've been involved in commercial due diligence and the biggest mergers and small deals as well. But we've also become more interested in strategy work. And when we've been working with different event organizers and then also others in the events ecosystem and private equity investors, they've said, okay, we like the way you do this. Can you help us with the strategy? Because some of those really big, expensive names aren't perhaps what we need. So we've ended up becoming much more involved in strategy. And I think we've put our feet on the ground in about 40 countries around the world working in the events industry. So we really do operate globally. And then coming out of that, we've become really interested in transformation and the changes needed within the events industry. Obviously driven by technology, and we've got the pandemic being a COVID accelerator. So we've really become more involved in transformation and really enjoying that as well. So I hope that makes sense as a journey that we've been on. Events and exhibitions is a very big part of what we do, but we continue to work in other parts of information, business media, and so on.
Absolutely, and I've jotted down here the word accelerator because you just use the term COVID Accelerator, which is brilliant because it sums up quite succinctly what happened coming up nigh on 2 years ago now. People had dipped their toes and looked at sort of transforming and adapting and evolving, and some companies had embraced it a little bit better than others. Others had dipped their toe in the water, but were still hesitant to maybe go in certain directions. And I love the term COVID Accelerator because that's exactly what it was. The pandemic happened, and everybody, you either do it or you don't do it. And if you don't do it, the chances are you're going to be left behind. So you've got to accelerate with everybody.
Yeah, and it's applies across different industries. That doesn't just apply to the events industry. So many things we see this change being accelerated. I think Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's been swimming naked. So I think part of that comes into play with COVID. If we look at the industry pre-COVID, the data which we publish through Globex, which is the annual forecast on the events industry, showed that this was an industry that was 2% digital and 98% analog. Now, there are not many industries that had that really bias towards being so limited in digital. And so I think the events industry obviously is a fantastic success for shareholders, for exhibitors, visitors, participants. It was really working very well. But before the pandemic, I think we saw that there were already some tensions, but they weren't that obvious to everyone because people were still making money. Investors were investing in businesses, spending a lot of money, paying high multiples, so high numbers of profits to buy businesses. And I think you know that I wrote a book with Marco Giberti, and the idea of that came just before the pandemic. In fact, we met the day before lockdown in the United States and decided to do this. And so that book was called Reinventing Live, the Always On Future of Events. And we had no clue what the pandemic would bring, but we both knew that change was needed because the industry was just ever so slightly losing against alternative ways of spending marketing money, alternative ways, that's for exhibitors and sponsors, alternative ways for visitors or attendees to use their time and to create whatever relationship they wanted. Although the events industry was growing, it was growing slightly less fast than alternative channels. And we saw the need for that change. And then, yes, the COVID Accelerator comes, and it turns out that we're just delighted that everything we talked about in the book really has been proven out and proven relevant.
And how much of the book, I suppose, ties into this Exhibitions 3.0? Because if I'm right in recapping, for the last few years, AMR has had this Exhibition 2.0 framework that's helped organisers rethink, improve customer satisfaction, achieve sustainable growth, all those sort of key things that we were looking at before the pandemic. So how much of a driver was the book towards Exhibitions 3.0? And if you can tell us a bit more about that, or was it the opposite way around? Did you have Exhibitions 3.0 within the organization and that helped shape the book?
No, it's an evolution essentially. So, and thanks for pointing out to Exhibitions 2.0. That was a really great initiative, and it remains valid. And I can't remember if we launched that 4 years ago or whatever it was. But the simple thesis there is that it's possible to achieve more with, for example, a major trade show by applying really up-to-date management techniques and so on to the trade show. And for example, there was a survey, again, I quoted this in the book, 50% of association shows in the United States do not have a strategy. They're simply operating to a budget or to a plan. So you take last year's floor plan, you photocopy it, the finance guys ask for a budget, you squeeze it down a bit, and you just do it again. And there's one association we work with where we said, you really shouldn't have that sign at the bottom of the escalator saying, see you again next year, because you need to be in touch with people a little bit more often than that.
Yeah.
But there was no strategy. And our view is that an event has to have a strategy as to how it's going to serve the industry, and that ties into so many things. So that's just one of the, I think, dozen initiatives within Exhibitions 2.0 where we simply said, here are the different things you can do, and some were around digital, some might be around pricing, some around data, and so on. These are initiatives, a toolbox that you can use to improve your event, make it more valuable to your customers, and also end up making more money. So that was Exhibitions 2.0, and it was very valid. It remains valid, and we ran some really inspiring workshops for various leadership teams, and we've helped certain events really put that into place, and it's really worked out very well. So that was 2.0. Then we come into the pandemic, and Marco, who's a fantastic guy, I think he knows just about everyone, but maybe one or two of you don't know him. He really is the guy who understands event technology, and he's been a successful entrepreneur and an investor himself. So we were a perfect combination, with him bringing that very tech angle, and I was bringing the strategy angle. The thesis is that we knew that there had to be change in the industry. And so that was, we put that out there just hoping to help, and we're delighted with the feedback on that. And then working with colleagues at AMR, including Florent Jarry, we came up with the concept of community catalyst. And this was really about thinking of the changing role of the event organizer, or essentially the event brand, in its industry. And we see that community catalyst is what some major events can aspire to be. So what is a community catalyst? It means you're not just there to rent a hall, erect booths, get people in there. You are actually going to serve the needs of that community. And part of that is going to be around, excuse me, still a bit of COVID there. Well, I am testing negative, still got a cough. Part of that is around the business, commerce, making connections, and so on. And another part is serving the industry with, whether it's advocacy, whether it's education, and very interestingly, some of the things which associations are doing. And it means that you're taking a forefront role in the community. So we created that concept, and that really resonated. Now, not every single event can become a community catalyst. Major ones can, and there are steps on the way. But it's a way of thinking. So we then developed that as the pandemic rolled on. We saw this was really a future role, or possibly a North Star for some. And then Exhibitions 3.0, this has come out of the work we've been doing with various organizers and discussions we're having with organizers. And I think the point here is really fundamentally not just about an event, for example, a major trade show. It's about the organization and how the organization should think and behave. And then within it, whether it's got one major event or a set of events, they can then actually operate differently in, again, what I'm going to describe as a really much more modern and joined up way, focused fundamentally on the customer.
And it's interesting that, well, I've actually just underlined the word customer on my notes here when I've got the Exhibitions 3.0 text in front of me, and I've literally, just before you said that, underlined that word customer. And the reason I've done that is because in certain events, not all of them, but certain events, there are 2, sometimes 3 customer bases. You look at an exhibition organizer, for example, they've got the people who walk through the door, their visitors, their attendees, their customers. They've got their exhibitors, the people who are in the booths, on the trade stands, their customers. They've also got, you could argue, even though the money's going in one direction, that their suppliers and the people that are working with it, they're certain group of customers as well. Their sponsors certainly are customers. So when you look at visitors, exhibitors, sponsors, customers can cover quite a broad range depending on the type of event organizer. And so there are all sorts of different considerations that have to fall in with those 2 or 3 types, sometimes 4 of customer.
Yeah. Look, this whole customer discussion is really important and very interesting. And I'm delighted that it kind of lets off the page at you, because that's the fundamental thing we want to get to, is understanding customers and having a genuine customer-centric culture. And there are a lot of businesses that would say they're customer-centric, but I think we would challenge them and say, well, perhaps you're not. You're more paying lip service to that. And we've definitely worked with people who said, oh, yeah, the exhibitors are our customers because they give us the money. Of course, they're the customers. And I think we would challenge that to say, well, actually, maybe your visitors or your attendees, maybe they really are the customers, because without them, you're not going to achieve anything with exhibitors. But also, actually, we'd like to take a step back from that and say, that's not really the right place to start. If we look at visitors, we know that about half of visitors who register don't actually show up. And so when people say, oh, visitors are the customers, are we talking about the visitors who are just walking on the floor of a show? What about the half who didn't turn up? Well, they actually are our customers too.
Of course
And
they
then
are.
let's take another step back. Well, what about the visitors who never registered, but who should have registered, but are on our database? Are they our customers as well? And then let's take another step back. We worked with one association and we helped them with universe mapping. And it turned out there were 20,000 customers that they didn't have in their database, although they were convinced they knew everyone. But 20,000 they were missing. So that's the universe. So I think there's a fundamental challenge to who are our customers and who should and so how do we define them? And I think so often we see this too narrowly. And so we should really say, we have this role in the community, we've got this role in the market. Here is a customer set we need to address. Now, not everyone is going to know us or love us or feel that we have permission to offer them a whole range of services.
Sure.
But let's start by understanding that and not just focus on those who turn up on day one of the event. So it's a mindset about understanding those customers. And then the next thing is, quite often I would challenge people. I would say, well, what's the one thing you need to know? And I ask that question so often, and I don't think anyone has ever given me the answer, which I personally think is the right one. And what do you need to know? The answer is, why did those people not sleep last night? And if you know why they didn't sleep last night, i.e., what business problem they're trying to solve, and you can then go and help them solve it, you're then in their head and you're going to begin to start to give them some offerings that make sense. And then you do your classic segmentation. So not all customers are going to be the same. And in marketing terms, you start developing what are called personas, and they can be quite powerful. You segment your database. You can just get a lot smarter about how you are understanding the customer universe, what they need, what their choices are, and how we approach them.
And is that going to be assisted if the statistic that you read out earlier starts becoming a little bit more balanced? So as we become more than 2% digital and less than 98% analog, as that statistic starts to move slowly to never being quite 50-50 but more balanced, is that ultimately going to help? Is that what we're aiming for, is to reduce or increase those two statistics in the right way?
Yeah, they are interlinked is the obvious point. So obviously when we have a digital relationship with our customers, we can track and we can have a much better understanding of what they do. We can track their behavior. We can get a better sense of value and so on. And of course, there's a lot of exciting things we can do about the physical customers, tracking where they are in an exhibition hall, and we can track their digital journey before, sometimes during and after an event as well. So I think we've got to be careful of this word digital because it can mean so many things to so many different people. The 2% digital revenue simply means that we're not offering a sufficient level of digital services, and different people give different figures. It used to be 10%, sometimes it's 20%. I've heard higher, and then you have to define digital. But fundamentally, we need to have a much higher proportion of digital revenues because it means we're then serving customers in much better ways. But then the other way to think of this word digital, of course, is the way we use data. There's a digital exhaust where everyone is going and traveling. This is helping us with data. And I've talked about that database that's based on our customer universe, understanding it, segmenting it, and really tracking that is going to be a very important thing. And there are better and better tools and skills available. But I think there's a long way to go in the way in which we are using data to understand our customers. For example, could we get to the point of understanding purchasing intent through the digital journey? Because purchasing intent would be incredibly important. That might be very ambitious for some, but there could be steps on the way. So I think we're talking about digital in two ways. One is creating revenues where value is delivered, and the second is using all of the tools which are available to us.
Should we be using the word digital at all?
No, we shouldn't. That's a great question. So it's funny that Exhibitions 3.0 we've been running programs like this with some organizers, and some of them say, oh, this is our digital transformation program. And fine, no harm in them saying that. But we didn't want to call this a digital transformation program because that means so many things to so many people. Now, I mean, in my early career, we did a lot of work in industrial stuff, and you'd walk around the factory, and it was fascinating. Would you say to anyone in the factory, do you do electricity here? I mean, it'd be a bonkers question. Well, actually, they might have pneumatic or hydraulic, whatever. But
yeah.
So are you going to say to people, well, do you do digital? It's a mad question.
This is why I asked, because I think that it puts people off. It scares people who don't fully understand it. But the reality is everybody's digital.
Yeah.
You know, people's grandparents who are 80 years old now have iPads and they read their news.
We're all digital. Look,
we're all no.
Everywhere.
Last time I looked, I didn't see people working from home with a Rolodex and a circular dial phone. You know, everyone, and so I think there are certain terms that actually we need to just start abandoning and saying, right, well, instead of having a digital marketing strategy, well, what other marketing strategy is there nowadays? Because very few people use the print press like they did 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
look, we're completely agreed. So, and that's why we don't call this digital transformation. And I think somewhere in the white paper, we say some people call it that. This is simply a modern way of working.
Yeah,
is the way to look at it. So it's a modern way of working, and it's really based on customer needs. I think another thing that we really emphasize is that you've got to have some kind of North Star as a term of, we know what our direction is going to be, and we have alignment in the organization. And obviously this needs to come from the top. The CEO needs to buy into it. And it really means that we can articulate what we're going to be. And it can be a really useful thing to say, okay, what is the art of the possible? How far can we push this? And then you obviously put a realistic spin on that, and you can come up with whether it's a mission statement or something. And we need the team to understand that we're now going to do things in a different way. And sometimes you give that a name for whatever changes you're making within an organization. But we think it's really important to start with that North Star. We then think that this whole customer need point that you picked on absolutely correctly is the next big thing. And then it's about changing ways of working. And I think that we're in an industry where it can be sometimes a little bit. Is that someone joining in? There's a dog barking in the background.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, we should point out that both the dogs are here today, Bonnie and Mabel, and they've been very good so far. But that's them wanting to have their say on Exhibitions 3.0. So
I'll take that as applause. I've got a dog that's completely mad, but fortunately it's nowhere near the microphone.
Yes, they're here with me today. It's probably the postman that's been. Anyway, listeners, apologies for that introduction on today's podcast.
You don't need to apologize, because that's actually new ways of working, and we're doing a new way of working here. So I think that this is an industry which has tended to be quite conservative in some ways. Because if you run, for example, an event every year, you're a little bit nervous about testing something. Whereas if you've got a website up 365 and you're trading through that, we know that Amazon is constantly testing. You could just as easily be on a test site as on the real site.
Yes.
Seeing whether the color pink or blue causes you to click left or right or whatever it is. And I think because on the annual cycle, there's a bit more conservatism, but we do see that it's possible to actually bring in agile ways of working. And we've seen some people change to that with test and learn approach. And that's very powerful. Again, that's going to be part of the culture story and the way in which leadership is going to say, okay, if we fail on something, that's okay. We're not going to beat you up for that.
Yeah.
So this isn't just a question of saying, oh, well, let's go and hire a digital person who will sit at the end of the corridor and be a bit of a geek or whatever. This is not at all that. This is about new ways of working, testing and learning. Can we make these skills endemic in the organization so everyone is understanding new ways of working, although your organization won't always allow that to begin with, and with things really which are cutting edge, you might want to have those at the center in the first instance. But I think there's a lot of thinking around the organization and the people and the culture. And I'm going to refer to another concept we came up with, but this was 8 or 10 years ago. That was Media Company of the Future. And that was focused on B2B media as well as events. And people were quite shocked when we simply said, yeah, there'll be fewer people, but they'll be paid more. And that is absolutely playing out, because we know that there's a war for talent, and we know that getting the right skills is very tricky. But fundamentally, I think this is playing out. We can automate. We don't necessarily need to have quite as many people, but we need to have better qualified people in order to deliver within these new ways of working.
Well, one final question today, please, Denzil, if I may, before we start to wrap up. This North Star and the whole idea of having a strategy, a clear strategy to what you're doing as an event, and in any business. If you work with a client and you develop this strategy and you say, this is what we're going to do, this is our North Star, this is what we're aiming for, how important is it to also develop and identify key, I suppose, dare I say it, KPIs, so steps along that route, along that journey, to say, look, we are on track here? Because often people can set themselves these big strategies and ultimate goals and what they want to achieve, but until they get there, they sort of don't really know how they got there, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. It needs to be joined up, doesn't it? So we set the vision, we have a strategy, and then you're going to have an implementation on that, and you'll have a timetable, goals, and so on, and you run that carefully. And of course, there'll be minor course corrections and so on, as there always are as things arise. But I think you're absolutely right in talking about measures of success, because that is something which we need to look at differently. We're very used to the revenue numbers, profit numbers. We're used to visitor numbers, square meters, and so on. But I think we want to look at some customer KPIs. So, and they can be around quality of engagement. So the extent to which we've got engagement, and that can be the engagement through the year with our relationship with them. It may be just through newsletters or whatever that is. So that's the base engagement. Then you've got the high traffic moments. So those could be whether they're webinars or something which are run during the year, or other types of high traffic moments. And then you've got the peak engagements. And that's not just counting the number of people who turned up. It's actually understanding what they did and what value they're giving to your exhibitor customers. And then you've got your brand KPIs, and I think you need to understand those sentiment metrics. NPS obviously are very well known. They're going to be within those, and you're going to have the classic digital engagement metrics. And then you can see, okay, what uplift am I getting in the core business, and what other benefits am I getting through this, and am I able to actually create some new revenues? So I think it's really important, yes, to set the strategy, to have the implementation, but then to use new types of metrics to measure what we are doing, not just those ones that we've just been using the whole time. And they're all going to be about customers. Are we engaging with customers? Are we delighting them? How do we adjust to make sure we're satisfying that customer universe, or if we're acting as a community catalyst, if that's the way we're thinking of this?
We have been talking today on the podcast to Denzil Rankine, the Executive Chairman at AMR International, about the introduction of Exhibitions 3.0, a series of practical steps enabling organisers to secure longevity for their brands through improved relationships with customers. Denzil, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. If people do want to find out more about Exhibitions 3.0 and indeed any of the other services and what you guys are up to at AMR International, where do they go? How do they do that?
Okay. Well, please go and visit amrinternational.com, which is our website, and you'll find the white papers and so on are all available there. Or also feel free to connect with me. You'll find my email there, or obviously via LinkedIn. And also, we're just always happy just to kick around these ideas, just as I'm doing here, because we believe passionately in what can be achieved and how much value there is in the industry. But it's such a time of change. It's really exciting to help people on the way.
And also another shout out to Marco Giberti, a name that we know well on the podcast, and obviously through our sister podcast, the Event Tech Talk Show, and our community over at Event Tech Live. Big shout out to Marco. Hope you're doing well. And that brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Our thanks again to Denzil Rankine from AMR International for talking to us about their Exhibitions 3.0 and what they're about to introduce, and some of those steps, and loads more to talk about, loads more for you guys to find out about. Any of our podcast listeners tuning in to today's episode, go over to amrinternational.com and find out what those guys have got, and read some of the stuff that they put quite clearly a lot of hard work and thought into preparing for the industry. And of course, if you want to find out a little bit more about event industry news and everything that's going on in the various sectors of our wide industry, please head over to eventindustrynews.com. You can check out all the latest news, features and supplements, and indeed video versions of all of our podcasts. And of course, if you're already watching today's podcast on the eventindustrynews.com, hello to you all. Don't forget that you can go over to your favorite podcast platform on wherever you get your podcasts from and listen to audio-only versions of all of our 250-something podcasts. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Our thanks again to our guest, Denzil Rankine from AMR International. My name's James Dixon. As always, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you on the next edition of the Event Industry News Podcast. Goodbye, everybody.